Hi, this is Ryan Bush with Pacific Reiki. With the coronation of King Charles and Queen Camilla, a lot of people are thinking about things like coronation and royalty. So it seems appropriate to share a few thoughts about what we could call the coronation of the true self. Personally, I wish that the immense amount of money that was spent on the coronation could have instead be spent on helping those in need or on honoring those who go through so many challenges in their daily lives and honoring everyone who tries to make the world a better place. But to the extent that there's value in having a huge lavish ceremony, the value, I believe, is in honoring the part of each and every single one of us that is royal. In a certain sense, we are all kings and queens because each and every single one of us have a part of ourselves that is incredibly deep, wise, and beautiful, which some traditions call the true self, the whole self, the capital S self, as it's called in Jungian psychology. Other traditions might call it the Buddha self, Christ consciousness, or our soul. But whatever name we give to it, there's a reason why so many traditions believe that there is this aspect of ourselves. We might catch glimpses of the true self in experiences during deep meditations, during so-called awakening experiences, in various powerful dreams, near-death experiences, and countless other ways when an incredibly beautiful part of ourselves shines through. It might even just happen in our daily life when, for example, one day I was just looking in the mirror and it was a moment of calm reflection, and then this part of myself seemed to suddenly shine through. Like it was a look of knowing that came through in my eyes that felt like it was from something beyond my ordinary self, something slightly other in a way. And I just got curious about what that was. And the more deeply I connected with that, including during meditation and other experiences, the more I came to understand that that's really this deep part of myself. We might catch glimpses of our true self also in thoughts and images that might come to us. It might just be a really quiet voice of intuition that is very easy to overlook, and we could just discount it and just think it's part of our ordinary thoughts. Or these might be thoughts or images that come to us like a lightning bolt out of the blue, coming with a thunderclap of recognition of a voice of deep wisdom, beauty, and clarity. But, whether we've caught glimpses of this part of ourselves or not, there's a lot of reasons to believe that there is this part of ourselves. After all, we don't necessarily have to have direct experiences of supernovas or black holes or other phenomena from deep space in order to trust scientists and people who have observed these things through various kinds of telescopes or whatever, in order to believe that there are so many things beyond our ordinary way of perceiving things in our daily lives. So if we trust people who seem to talk from some degree of understanding, we don't have to experience everything ourselves in order to believe that such things exist. Personally, I believe it's far beyond just a matter of blind belief. It's about our own direct experience. So I really encourage everyone to just be curious about these parts of ourselves that can shine through. And I've talked in other videos, books, and classes about how we can go about connecting with this part of ourselves. But the fundamental point here is that the perspective we have can fundamentally impact how we live our lives. You know, since I just recorded a video about these three levels of ourself, the lower, ordinary, and higher selves, it's worth just saying a few thoughts about what our perspective is when we're living life from one of these three different perspectives. When we live life from the ordinary perspective, we're focused on our daily activities, everything we have to do between work or school, friends, family, loved ones, social media, our hobbies, whatever we're busy with in our daily lives. We're familiar with how we usually approach things. And that's all well and good. There are many reasons for approaching things from the ordinary perspective. There is also the lower self, or the lower perspective, when we get caught up in a lot of anxiety, stress, fear, sadness, jealousy, anger. All these heavy, strong emotions can fundamentally impact how we see the world and ourselves. When we're approaching the world from the perspective of the lower self, we'll tend to be annoyed at almost everything. We'll constantly be judging things, looking for problems, seeing issues, being upset about things. And, most of us have probably experienced the world from that perspective at some times or another, and probably know that it's easy for us to just get caught up in that perspective, and it just spins on and can be habit forming, just as it can be habit forming to approach things from our ordinary perspective. If we are mainly familiar with just one of these perspectives, then we think probably that's all there is to life, and we don't question it at all. But the more often we catch glimpses of this beautiful, wise, and insightful part of ourselves that we could call the higher self, the more we are able to approach life from that perspective. We may not always be able to feel that direct connection with our higher self in our ordinary daily life. It can take a fair amount of work to connect with that deep part of ourselves over and over and over again. But even if we've just caught a glimpse or two, or if we believe people who have talked about this perspective, when we approach life from the perspective of the higher self, it's a fundamentally different way of approaching the world. Instead of habitually approaching things so that we're constantly annoyed or constantly looking for issues or constantly blaming people for this or that, instead of just approaching things from all those perspectives, when we approach life from the perspective of the higher self, we habitually approach things from the perspective of love and joy and beauty and seeing the good everywhere. It doesn't mean that bad things don't exist or that people can do awful, awful, awful things. Of course, the shadow and the lower self definitely exists. And so it's not about having a naive Pollyannish perspective. It's just that we can choose what we want to focus on. If we want to focus on making the world a better place and on trying to approach things from the perspective of love and compassion, then we habitually approach things in that way. And it's a fundamentally different way of living our lives. So bringing it back to the concept of a coronation, the beautiful and powerful aspect of having a coronation is that it marks a transition point from one way of life to another. The moment before a crown is placed on someone's head, they are an ordinary person, and then afterwards they're marked as a king or a queen. So in the same way, we can choose to have a moment where we mark a transition from one way of living our lives to a new way. Some people try to mark that transition by choosing a new name or saying that they're converting from one thing to another. We don't have to make any kind of official change like that. We can just decide that we're going to approach things from the perspective of love, joy, and beauty. And of course, that doesn't mean that we won't approach things from the ordinary or lower perspective at times, because life can be extremely challenging, and we can all get stressed out and upset about things at times. But if we've chosen that we're going to try to approach things from the perspective of the higher self, then that makes it easier to approach things that way on a regular basis. Some other aspects of the coronation are also relevant to remember. For example, that coronations are usually marked by various kinds of physical objects, as well as rituals that help mark that occasion. Obviously, a king and queen would have crowns placed on their heads, but they would also wear a robe that might be made from dead animals and things like that, or have a scepter or other objects that are decorated with precious metals and jewels. There might be a throne, all these different things that mark and remind people about who the king and queen are. And similarly, there would be rituals like having someone place the crown on the head and saying phrases like "God save the king" and things like that. So when we think about having a coronation of our true self, we can also remember that there can be physical objects and rituals that can help remind us of that connection with our true self. Many traditions from around the world use various kinds of physical objects to help remind people about that connection. For example, some traditions would use an item of clothing, like monks wearing robes. In the Jewish tradition, they might wear a yarmulke or wear Star of David. Christians might wear a cross. Various traditions might use prayer beads. There are many different kinds of physical objects that can be used to remind us of that connection with our true self. Some traditions might use things like wearing our hair long or not cutting our hair at all. Some people might wear a turban. In the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha is traditionally depicted as having a bump on top of his head, which is called an ushnisha, which might be thought of as a symbol or representation of the connection at the crown of our heads with that gateway to the higher aspects of ourself. But whether we want to use a physical object or not, we can also use rituals to remind us of this connection with our true self. For example, practices like meditation or contemplation. Prayer in various traditions are also used that way, of course, using things like incense, or some people use holy water or baptism as ways of reminding us of this connection or connecting with the true self. So whether we use a physical object, ceremony, or whether we just think of it in how we're approaching life, having these reminders of ourselves on a regular basis can be very important to try to live life from the perspective of the higher self. So fundamentally, it's really worth remembering that Each and every single one of us are kings and queens. Each and every single person, each and every single animal, plant, pebble, everything everywhere is royal. Countless traditions believe that we are not just our physical bodies and our minds, we are also, each and every single one of us are the oneness that is everything. Each and every single one of us is this vast source of energy and beauty and light, which the tradition of Reiki calls the great bright light. Other traditions might call it the tree of life, the cosmos, the bulk, as it is called in string theory, the holographic universe, or just simply everything. We aren't just these tiny little solitary ants cut off and separate from everything. We are not just connected with everything. Each and every single one of us is everything. So when we talk about the coronation of the true self, it's important to remember that we're talking about crowning that aspect of ourselves that is the deepest part of ourselves, that's full of love, light, and beauty, that it's a part of ourselves that is love, light, and beauty. So we're not talking about crowning the part of ourselves that is our ordinary self or ego, and we're not talking about the crowning the part of ourselves that's the lower self or our shadow. We all know how many unspeakably awful things are done on a daily basis and have been done throughout human history by people who feel like they have the right to treat others as being less important than themselves and to treat others without any consideration for the consequences and how much others get hurt. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because when some people think about being a king or a queen, they think that might give them the right to treat others with anything less than kindness and consideration. Before I wrap things up here, I just wanted to talk a little about the crown itself. Of course, there's the physical object of a crown that would be worn around the top of the head, but there's also an energetic center in the head that is often called the crown center. You know, when we talk about the process of connecting with the deepest part of ourselves that we're calling here the true self, but goes by many other names I mentioned earlier, when we try to connect with that part of ourselves, it is often done by a process of opening the various energy centers from the base of the spine up to the crown of the head. And, you know, in the tradition of Reiki, we would generally work with the hara, would work with the heart, we'd work with what's usually called the head center, and then we would work with connecting with the great bright light, or what's called the daikomyo space in the tradition of Reiki. And that last part about connecting with the whole self, the true self, the daikomyo space, is basically a process of opening the crown center so that then our energy can flow smoothly from the base of the spine up through the crown of the head. And when we open that crown center, people often describe a range of experiences. Some people feel it's like it's a 1,000-petaled lotus opening at the crown of their head. Some people say there's a sensation kind of like an egg dripping down the inside of their head or down the back of the throat. Some people talk about a feeling of complete wholeness and oneness. So people talk about joining all opposites together, heaven and earth, masculine and feminine, yin and yang, or yang, depending upon your pronunciation. There are a whole range of experiences associated with that crown center itself. and then more experiences beyond that when our energy raises up from the base of the spine to the crown of the head and then out into the space beyond. And it's those latter range of experiences when we might often have the deepest experiences of connecting with the true self. So there's a whole lot to say about that range of experiences, but the reason I'm bringing it up here is because, there's a reason people talk about the crown as being so central in our process of personal growth and transformation and connecting with the true self. Personally, my experience has been, and many other people report similar things, that when we connect with the head center, that would often correspond to the pineal gland at the top of the brain stem, which is associated with releasing a neurotransmitter called DMT that is often associated with visionary or spiritual experiences. And then when we open the crown center, that is often associated with the pituitary gland, which is associated with these experiences of wholeness and bliss, because the pituitary gland releases oxytocin, which is something that produces experiences of bliss and is actually associated with things like childbirth and nursing children. And the pituitary gland basically helps to unite together all the different glands of the endocrine system, each of which is associated with an energy center in the body. So there are reasons why the crown center is associated with these experiences of complete wholeness and uniting everything together. And there are reasons why so many traditions focus on that point at the top of the head, including how Reiki does various attunements, and how the Buddha is described as having that bump at the top of the head, that Ushnisha I mentioned earlier, as well as why the crown of the head is covered by a yarmulke in Judaism, because it's considered too sacred to leave uncovered most of the time. Reasons why so many traditions focus on the crown in one way or another. So I just wanted to mention that there are a lot of reasons why the crown is important, not just as a symbol, but also as a crucial part of our process of personal growth, awakening, and transformation. I talk a little more about these various parts of the process of transformation and connecting with the true self in my most recent book, From Wandering to Illumination. The appendix tries to lay out as simply as possibly the whole process of personal growth and awakening in several steps. So check that out if you're interested in learning how to connect with the true self, and I also talk about it in other videos, books, and classes. So if there's any way I can help with your journey, please let me know. In closing, I just want to encourage everyone to be as connected with their true selves as possible. Let's all be crowned as kings and queens, not by a physical object of a crown, but let's be crowned by our experiences of connecting with the deepest, truest parts of ourselves. Let's be crowned by our love, compassion, and wisdom. Let's be crowned by our beauty and joy. So those are a few thoughts about the coronation of the true self. If anyone has any thoughts or questions, please let me know. Peace, love, and blessings.